The night I disappeared from my parents' home, no one screamed, no one chased me, and no one tried to stop me. My mother cried so quietly that the walls absorbed her pain. My father sat frozen on the couch, staring straight ahead as if something inside him had died. My brothers and sister were sobbing, begging me not to leave, but I didn't turn back. Before you continue, I need you to stay with this story until the very end. This is not a romantic story, and it is not about rebellion or freedom. This is a confession about how easily trust can be destroyed and how painfully slow regret arrives afterward. If you still have parents who wait for your calls, siblings who worry about you in silence, or a home that feels safe even on difficult days, then this story is for you. Watch carefully because one decision, made in secrecy, can turn a lifetime of love into a lifetime of grief. My name is Lena Carter. I was 23 years old, and in that moment, I shattered the trust of the only people who had ever loved me without conditions. I thought I was choosing love. What I was really choosing was regret that would follow me for the rest of my life. Before I became the daughter who disappeared, I was the child my parents centered their entire lives around. I grew up in a modest but warm home where love showed itself in routines and small details. My mother believed care meant presence. She woke up early to prepare my meals, checked my school bag every night, and waited for me to come home even when I was old enough to walk in alone. My father believed care meant protection. He worked long hours, saved quietly, and never complained about the sacrifices he made so I could have a better future. Everything they did was for me, and they never made me feel like a burden. They trusted me completely. They trusted my judgment, my choices, and my ability to know right from wrong. They invested in my education without hesitation, enrolling me in good schools, buying books I never questioned the cost of, and encouraging me to dream without limits. By the time I reached university, I carried their trust as if it were permanent, something that could never be broken. I believed love like theirs would always be there, no matter what I did. University felt like freedom in ways I wasn't prepared for. The campus was busy and loud, filled with people who didn't know my family or the life I came from. For the first time, no one checked where I was going or what time I would be home. I mistook that absence of concern for independence, not realizing it was my parents' love that had always protected me. That was when I met him. He was much older, calm, and well-spoken, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say and when to say it. He approached me slowly, respectfully, asking about my studies, my ambitions, and my life. He listened in a way that made me feel important. Over time, his words became a quiet influence in my mind. He never spoke badly about my parents outright, but he planted doubt gently, asking whether I ever felt restricted or misunderstood. He told me I deserved freedom, that love meant choosing your own happiness, and that fear was the only thing holding me back. I didn't tell my parents about him, not because I hated them, but because I knew they would see something I was refusing to see. Silence became my shield, and secrecy became my habit. When the time came to leave, I didn't explain myself. I packed a bag, took my phone, and walked out without saying goodbye. When my parents tried to contact me, their calls filled my screen, and instead of answering, I blocked them. I convinced myself it was temporary, that I would explain everything later. What I didn't understand was that in those moments, my parents weren't just losing contact with their daughter. They were losing their peace, their sleep, and the trust they had spent their lives building. I left the country with him shortly after, believing I was stepping into a better life. But the man I followed was not the man he pretended to be. Behind closed doors, the charm faded, the promises disappeared, and I realized too late that I had been manipulated by someone who never truly cared for me. Alone in a foreign place, stripped of comfort and safety, memories of my parents began to haunt me. I remembered my mother's quiet care, my father's silent sacrifices, and the home I had destroyed without a word. That was when the regret truly began, and it was heavier than anything I had ever known. Life abroad did not unfold the way he promised. In the beginning, everything felt unfamiliar but manageable. New streets, a new apartment, a new language, and a sense of being far away from the consequences of my choices. I kept telling myself that discomfort was normal, that every new beginning required adjustment. But slowly, the cracks began to show. His patience thinned. His voice changed. The man who once listened so carefully now dismissed my questions and brushed off my concerns as weakness. The affection I was promised became conditional, given only when I agreed, stayed quiet, or stopped asking for reassurance. I found myself isolated in ways I had never experienced before. I didn't know anyone. I had no support system, no familiar faces, and nowhere to go when things felt wrong. My phone was quiet. I had blocked the only people who would have answered without hesitation. At night, when the apartment felt unbearably silent, I would sit on the edge of the bed and stare at my phone, wondering how many missed calls had turned into unanswered prayers back home. The truth about him revealed itself slowly but cruelly. He lied about his work, his finances, and even his past. Bills arrived that I didn't know existed. Conversations turned into arguments, and arguments turned into silence that felt heavier than shouting. I realized that I hadn't married a protector or a partner. I had followed a man who thrived on control and deception. The promises he once made were replaced with reminders of everything I had given up to be there. That was when memories of my parents began to surface relentlessly. I remembered my mother's hands smoothing my hair when I was anxious, her quiet presence in the background of my life, always steady, always patient. I remembered my father's late nights, the way he never complained about exhaustion, the way his concern showed itself in small, practical gestures. Those memories came with guilt so sharp it felt physical. I had traded unconditional love for uncertainty, safety for isolation, and trust for fear. I started to understand the depth of what I had done. My parents weren't just hurt when I left. They were shattered. I imagined my mother waking up every night, wondering where she went wrong, replaying my childhood in her mind, searching for the moment she failed me. I imagined my father carrying his grief quietly, telling people I was fine because admitting otherwise would break him. The thought that my absence had turned their home into a place of mourning crushed me in ways I couldn't explain. One night, alone in a foreign country, I broke down completely. I cried the way I hadn't cried when I left. I cried for the daughter I used to be, for the parents I had abandoned, and for the home I no longer had the courage to return to. That was the moment I finally admitted the truth to myself. I had not chosen love. I had chosen escape, and it had cost me everything that truly mattered. For the first time since I left, I unlocked my phone and stared at the blocked contacts. My mother. My father. Home. My finger hovered over the screen, shaking. I didn't know if they would answer. I didn't know if they would forgive me. All I knew was that the life I was living was built on lies, and the life I had destroyed was the only one that had ever been real. It took me days to gather the courage to unblock their numbers. I would open my phone, stare at the screen, and then lock it again, my heart pounding with fear. I kept imagining my mother's voice breaking the moment she heard mine, or worse, the sound of disappointment so deep that it came out as silence. I had hurt them once by leaving. I didn't know if I could survive hurting them again by reminding them I still existed. When I finally unblocked their contacts, my hands were shaking. The call history was empty, but I knew that didn't mean they hadn't tried. It only meant I hadn't been there to answer. I typed a message and deleted it. Typed another and erased that too. Nothing felt enough. No words could explain a year of silence, a year of blocked calls, a year of unanswered prayers. In the end, I pressed call without thinking, as if giving myself no time to change my mind. The phone rang only once. My mother answered. She didn't say my name. She didn't cry. She didn't ask where I had been or why I disappeared. She simply said hello, her voice quiet and careful, as if she were afraid the call might end if she spoke too loudly. The sound of her voice broke something inside me. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I could only cry, deep, shaking sobs that made it hard to breathe. She knew it was me. She always knew. She told me to calm down, to breathe, to speak when I was ready. Her voice was the same voice that had comforted me my entire childhood, and hearing it again made the distance between us feel unbearable. When I finally managed to speak, all I could say was that I was sorry. I told her I had made a terrible mistake. I told her I missed her. I told her I wanted to come home. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I imagined my mother sitting quietly, holding the phone, listening to my words with a heart that had already been broken once. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than I expected. She said that not a single day had passed without them worrying about me. She said my father had stopped sleeping properly, that my siblings had argued and cried and blamed themselves for not stopping me. She said the house hadn't felt like a home since the day I left. I closed my eyes and pictured them all, gathered in the same rooms I had grown up in, carrying a pain I had caused and never witnessed. The guilt pressed down on my chest until it felt hard to breathe. I told her everything then. I told her about the lies, the isolation, the fear. I told her I understood now what I had done and that I didn't expect forgiveness. I only wanted to come back. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, she said she needed to talk to my father. She said some wounds took time, even in families bound by love. But before she ended the call, she said something that stayed with me long after. She said, "You are still our daughter." Hearing those words felt like both mercy and punishment because I knew I hadn't deserved them. After the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at the wall, replaying every word. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if my father would ever look at me the same way again. But for the first time since I left, I felt something other than fear and regret. I felt a fragile, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost my family forever. The days after that call moved slowly, as if time itself was unsure of what to do with me. I waited for my mother to call back, checking my phone constantly, jumping at every vibration. Each hour felt longer than the last. I kept replaying our conversation in my head, wondering if I had said too much or too little, if my apology sounded sincere enough, or if my pain had come too late to matter. When my mother finally called again, her voice was tired. Not angry, just worn down by a year of quiet suffering. She told me she had spoken to my father. She didn't explain how that conversation went, and I didn't ask. I was too afraid of the answer. She said my father needed time, that the wound I had caused wasn't small, and that trust, once broken, didn't return quickly. I listened silently, knowing every word was deserved. She asked me practical questions then. Where I was living, whether I was safe, whether I had enough money. Those questions sounded ordinary, but they carried the weight of a mother who had been forced to worry from a distance. I answered honestly, admitting that I wasn't happy, that the man I had followed wasn't who I thought he was. I could hear her breathing change when I said that, like she had been expecting it, but still hoped she was wrong. That night, I thought about my father more than anyone else. I imagined him sitting at the same spot on the couch where I had last seen him, replaying my childhood in his mind, wondering how he had failed to protect me from myself. He had trusted me completely, and I had rewarded that trust with silence and disappearance. I wondered if he felt ashamed to talk about me, if people asked where I was and he changed the subject because the truth hurt too much. Meanwhile, life with the man I had married grew colder. He was irritated by my sadness, impatient with my questions, and dismissive of my longing to go home. When I mentioned my parents, his tone hardened. He reminded me that I had chosen this life, that going back would mean admitting failure. His words felt like chains, tightening every time I thought about leaving. I realized then that his love had always depended on my obedience. Late one night, I sat alone and opened old photos on my phone. Pictures of birthdays, family dinners, and quiet moments I had never thought to cherish. There was one photo of my parents standing together in the kitchen, smiling softly, unaware of what the future held. I stared at it for a long time, my chest aching with a grief that felt impossible to fix. I understood then that home wasn't just a place. It was the people I had abandoned. A few days later, my mother called again. This time, her voice was steadier. She told me my father had agreed to let me come home. Not because he was ready, she said, but because a parent's love doesn't disappear, even when it's wounded. She warned me that things wouldn't be the same, that healing would take time, and that I would need patience. I told her I understood. I didn't tell her how terrified I was of facing my father's eyes. When the call ended, I sat in silence, overwhelmed by a mix of relief and dread. I had been given a chance to return, but returning meant facing the damage I had caused. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of leaving a country or a man. I was afraid of standing in front of the people I loved most and seeing the pain I had carved into their lives. Preparing to leave felt nothing like the first time. Back then, I had packed in excitement and defiance, convincing myself I was stepping into something better. Now, every item I folded into my suitcase felt heavy with memory. I wasn't running toward a dream anymore. I was returning to the wreckage I had caused, unsure of what would still be standing when I arrived. The day I told him I was leaving, he didn't try to stop me. He laughed softly and said I would regret it, that I would come crawling back once I realized the world wasn't as forgiving as my parents. His words should have hurt, but they didn't. What hurt was knowing that I had once believed someone like him over the people who had never failed me. I walked out without looking back, realizing too late that this was the moment I should have chosen a year earlier. The journey home was quiet. Airports, long corridors, waiting lounges, all places filled with people going somewhere, while I felt suspended between who I was and who I had become. I watched families hugging at departure gates and felt a sharp ache in my chest. I wondered if my parents would hug me when they saw me or if the distance between us would still exist, invisible but solid. As the plane landed, my hands began to shake. Every familiar sight outside the window felt unreal, like I was returning to a life that no longer belonged to me. I imagined my mother waiting at home, restless, pacing, and my father sitting quietly, saying little, holding everything inside the way he always had. I wondered if my siblings had forgiven me or if they still carried resentment alongside love. When I finally stepped through the front door of my parents' house, time seemed to slow down. The walls looked the same, but the air felt different. My mother stood there, thinner than I remembered, her eyes filled with tears she didn't immediately let fall. She walked toward me slowly, as if afraid I might disappear again. When she finally held me, she cried into my shoulder, whispering my name over and over, as if saying it aloud could keep me from leaving again. My siblings stood nearby, watching silently. There was relief in their eyes, but also hurt. They hugged me one by one, each embrace carrying its own unspoken question. Why wasn't our love enough to make you stay? I didn't have an answer that could ease that pain. My father was the last person I faced. He was sitting in the same chair where I had last seen him, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable. When I stood in front of him, he looked up slowly. His eyes were tired, older, carrying a disappointment deeper than anger. He didn't raise his voice or accuse me. He simply asked if I was safe now. That question broke me more than anything else. I nodded, unable to speak, and he looked away, as if protecting both of us from what he felt. That night, I lay in my childhood room, staring at the ceiling I had once studied as a girl full of certainty about her future. Everything was familiar, yet nothing felt the same. I was home, but I was not whole. I understood then that forgiveness did not erase consequences. It only opened the door to living with them. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No one lectured me. No one demanded explanations. That silence felt heavier than anger ever could. My mother went back to her routines, cooking, cleaning, keeping herself busy, but I could see the effort it took. She watched me closely, as if afraid that if she blinked for too long, I might vanish again. Every time I stepped outside, even just to get some air, she asked where I was going. Not because she wanted control, but because fear had replaced trust. My siblings tried to act normal, but normal no longer existed between us. Conversations felt careful, measured. Laughter came, but it didn't stay long. I could sense their disappointment beneath the surface, the quiet resentment that they had carried for a year while my parents suffered. They had defended me when relatives asked questions, had protected my name even when they didn't understand my choices. Now, being back, I felt the weight of everything they had absorbed in my absence. My father remained distant. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't cold. He was simply guarded. He spoke to me when necessary, asked practical questions, and made sure I had what I needed, but the warmth that once defined our relationship was missing. I noticed it in small things, the way he no longer asked about my plans, the way he avoided long conversations, the way he left the room quietly when emotions rose too close to the surface. It hurt, but I knew it was a pain I had earned. At night, guilt refused to let me sleep. I replayed moments from my childhood, scenes I had once taken for granted. My mother cheering quietly at school events, my father waiting outside late-night study sessions, my siblings making space for me in every part of their lives. Those memories felt sharper now, edged with the knowledge that I had broken something fragile and irreplaceable. Regret settled into my chest like a permanent ache. I tried to help around the house, to be present, to show through actions what words could not fix. Sometimes my mother would smile at me, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. Other times, I caught her staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, love mixed with fear, relief mixed with sadness. It was then I understood that coming home didn't mean everything was healed. It only meant the long work of healing had finally begun. One evening, I overheard my parents talking quietly in the next room. My mother's voice trembled as she said she was grateful I was home, but afraid of trusting again. My father didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low and tired. He said trust takes years to build and seconds to destroy. Hearing those words felt like a confession of my crime, spoken without accusation. I stepped away silently, carrying the truth with me. That night, lying in my bed, I accepted something I had been avoiding since the moment I returned. Love had brought me back home, but trust would take time, maybe more time than I deserved. And no matter how much my parents loved me, the version of me they had once believed in so completely was gone. In her place stood someone older, humbled, and painfully aware that some lessons come only after everything precious has already been tested. As weeks passed, the distance between us shifted, not disappearing but changing shape. The tension in the house softened, replaced by a careful routine that tried to resemble normal life. My mother spoke to me more openly now, asking about my days, reminding me to eat, offering small comforts that felt like quiet attempts to rebuild what had been lost. Each gesture carried effort, as if love itself had become something she handled with caution. My father remained reserved, but I began to notice subtle changes. He listened when I spoke, even if he didn't respond much. He no longer left the room immediately when emotions surfaced. Sometimes he asked simple questions about my health or plans, nothing personal, nothing deep, but enough to tell me he was trying. Those moments mattered more to me than any dramatic confrontation ever could. One afternoon, my mother asked me to sit with her in the kitchen. The sunlight filtered through the window the same way it had when I was a child, illuminating the space with a familiarity that felt almost cruel. She told me how difficult the past year had been. How she woke up every night expecting to hear my footsteps. How she replayed our last conversation again and again, wondering what she could have said differently. She admitted that forgiveness came from love, but trust came from time, and time could not be rushed. Listening to her, I realized something painful. My absence hadn't frozen their lives, it had reshaped them. They had learned to live with fear, with unanswered questions, with the possibility that they might never see me again. I had walked back into their lives, but I had also reopened wounds they were still learning to manage. Later that evening, my father called me into the living room. He didn't sit down right away. He stood near the window, his back to me, staring outside as if gathering strength. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but strained. He said he had trusted me more than anyone in the world. He said watching me leave without a word had made him question not just his judgment, but his worth as a father. He wasn't angry anymore. He was tired. I wanted to defend myself, to explain how manipulated I had been, how lost and confused I felt at the time. but I stopped. For the first time, I understood that explanations weren't what he needed. He needed acknowledgement. So I apologized without conditions or excuses. I told him I was wrong. I told him I knew I had failed him. He nodded slowly, accepting the words but not offering reassurance in return. That night, something settled inside me. I realized that forgiveness was not a moment but a process, one that unfolded unevenly for everyone involved. My parents were trying in their own ways, and so was I. The past couldn't be erased, but it could be faced honestly. And for the first time since I returned, I felt the weight of responsibility, not just for my own healing, but for the healing of the people I had hurt the most. Life slowly found a rhythm again, but it was a quieter one, stripped of the ease we once had. I began helping my mother more around the house, not because she asked, but because I needed to feel useful, present, accountable. We cooked together, cleaned together, shared small conversations that never touched the past directly. Sometimes she would look at me and smile, and for a brief moment, it felt like I was her daughter again, not the source of her deepest fear. But healing wasn't linear. Some days were heavier than others. Certain sounds, a late phone vibration, a door closing too hard, made my mother tense. Certain silences made my father withdraw again. I realized that my return hadn't ended their anxiety, it had only changed its shape. They loved me, but they were afraid of loving me without restraint, afraid that trust might make them vulnerable again. I began to confront my own reflection differently. The girl who had once believed she knew better than everyone else was gone. In her place stood someone cautious, ashamed, and deeply aware of consequences. I avoided social gatherings, not because I was told to, but because I didn't feel worthy of carefree moments yet. I felt like I needed to earn my place back in my own family. One evening, while sorting old boxes in the storage room, I found items from my childhood, school certificates, handwritten notes from my parents, photos from birthdays and graduations. There was a card my father had written years ago, telling me how proud he was of the woman I was becoming. Reading it now felt like a quiet punishment. I cried alone, realizing how much faith had once been placed in me and how badly I had mishandled it. That night, I sat with my siblings and listened to their side of the story for the first time. They told me about the questions they couldn't answer, the rumors they shut down, the nights they watched our parents break in ways they had never seen before. They admitted they were angry, not because I left, but because I left them to manage the aftermath. Hearing that hurt deeply, but it also grounded me. I had not just hurt my parents. I had fractured the entire family. As the weeks went by, my father began to soften in subtle ways. He asked my opinion on small household decisions. He stayed in the room longer during conversations. One morning, he handed me a cup of tea without saying a word. That simple gesture carried more meaning than any apology or forgiveness ever could. It told me he was trying, even if he wasn't ready to say it out loud. I understood then that redemption doesn't come with grand gestures. It comes quietly, through consistency, patience, and humility. I couldn't undo what I had done, but I could choose, every day, to stay, to be honest, and to rebuild slowly. And while the past would always be part of us, the future, fragile and uncertain, was still something we were learning to face together. Just when I thought the worst of the storm had passed, reality reminded me that consequences don't disappear simply because you return home. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to me. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the moment I saw it, my stomach tightened. It was from him. Short, cold, and unapologetic. He accused me of betrayal, claimed I owed him loyalty, and warned that leaving had consequences. Reading his words made my hands shake, not with love or longing, but with fear and disgust at how deeply I had once been deceived. I didn't hide the letter. For the first time, I chose transparency over fear. I handed it to my parents. My mother read it quietly, her face pale, her lips pressed tightly together. My father read it once, then folded it carefully and placed it on the table. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't explode. He simply said that this was exactly why they had been afraid. Hearing that hurt more than any anger could have. It confirmed that their fears had been justified all along. That night, my parents sat with me and spoke honestly, without softness or blame. They told me how helpless they had felt when I vanished, how every unknown number made their hearts race, how every news story about young women abroad felt like a personal threat. They admitted that loving me had meant living in constant fear, and that fear had changed them. I listened without interruption, knowing that this was a debt I would never fully repay. In the days that followed, I began therapy. It wasn't something my parents demanded, it was something I chose. I needed to understand why I had been so easily swayed, why I had confused manipulation for love, and why I had believed freedom meant cutting myself off from the people who cared most. Each session peeled back layers of denial and forced me to confront parts of myself I wasn't proud of. Healing, I learned, was uncomfortable and slow. My parents noticed the changes before I did. I spoke more carefully. I asked for advice instead of assuming I knew better. I stopped disappearing into my room and started showing up, even on days when guilt made it hard to breathe. Trust didn't return suddenly, but it inched forward quietly, like something fragile learning how to stand again. One evening, my father surprised me by asking me to take a walk with him. We didn't talk much at first. Then he said something simple but devastating, that losing me had been the most painful experience of his life, not because I left, but because he couldn't protect me from my own choices. I apologized again, but this time he stopped me. He said apologies mattered less now than consistency. He said staying would mean more than any words I could ever offer. That walk marked a shift. I realized that my story wasn't ending with forgiveness or punishment, but with responsibility. I would carry what I had done for the rest of my life, not as a wound to reopen, but as a reminder of who I never wanted to become again. The past had broken us, but it had also forced us to face truths we could no longer ignore. And slowly, painfully, we were learning how to live with them. Months passed, and life at home settled into a rhythm that was fragile but real. I began to understand that returning didn't erase the past, but it gave me the chance to be part of my family again, even if trust had to be rebuilt piece by piece. Mornings started quietly with my father reading the newspaper and my mother preparing breakfast. I joined them, carrying plates, helping in small ways, and slowly feeling a part of the rhythm I had once abandoned. Each small gesture became a thread weaving us back together. My siblings were cautious, but their smiles began to feel warmer, genuine, and tentative hugs became longer. We laughed again, sometimes awkwardly, sometimes freely, and I realized that love doesn't vanish, it endures, even when tested. I attended family dinners, shared stories about my days abroad without shame, and listened to theirs without judgment. The process was slow, but it was real, and it felt like coming home not just to a house, but to the people who had always been my foundation. I met my mother in the kitchen one afternoon while she was chopping vegetables. She didn't say much, just handed me a knife and smiled. "You're learning again," she said softly. I nodded, and for the first time, I understood the weight of her forgiveness. It wasn't granted lightly. It was offered alongside trust, rebuilt through patience, observation, and care. I had to prove every day that I deserved it. My father began speaking to me more openly, sharing memories from my childhood, recalling small victories, and even the mistakes I had made when I was younger. He reminded me that he had trusted me because he believed in me, and that belief could be rebuilt if I stayed committed to being present and honest. Hearing him speak this way made the guilt in my chest still heavy, but now it was balanced with hope. At night, lying in the room where I had grown up, I thought of the girl I had been, the one who ran away, who believed she could find love elsewhere without considering the consequences. I whispered apologies into the darkness, acknowledging the mistakes, the lies, and the lost time. But I also whispered a promise that I would never take my family, their trust, or their love for granted again. The man I had once believed in faded from my mind, a memory edged with shame and lessons learned too late. The life I had returned to wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past were visible, but it was mine to nurture again. Each day, I worked to rebuild connections, to make amends, and to honor the unwavering love of the people who had never stopped believing in me. Finally, I understood that home isn't just a place. It's the people who wait, who forgive, who love despite everything. And while I had broken their trust, returning had given me a chance to repair it slowly, piece by piece. I was still their daughter. I still belonged. And for the first time since I left, I felt that fragile, trembling hope that love real. Real, patient, enduring love could heal even the deepest wounds. 8 years had passed since I returned home that night, the night I had broken my parents' trust and shattered the world they had built for me. 8 years of healing, of rebuilding, of apologizing over and over. 8 years of living with the memory of what I had done and the fear that no matter how much time passed, it would never truly leave me. I am now married to a man who is everything I never thought I deserved: loving, patient, caring, and endlessly supportive. He holds me when I cry, he smiles at me when I laugh, and he treats our little baby with a tenderness that reminds me of my own parents' love. My family, after years of gradual healing, has embraced him as their own, and they love our child as fiercely as they loved me. On paper, my life is full, happy, and complete. And yet, despite all this, a quiet fear lives inside me. Even now, I am careful, cautious, always aware of the possibility that someone from my past might appear, the man I had once followed blindly, the man whose lies had nearly destroyed my life. The memory of that manipulation is etched into my mind like a scar I cannot erase. I still flinch at the thought of meeting him anywhere, in any corner of the world. I still carry the nervous tension, the alertness, the fear that my past could collide with my present at any moment. Every night, when I put my baby to sleep and sit beside my husband, I sometimes cry silently. Not because I am unhappy now, but because I remember the girl I was, the mistakes I made, the trust one broke, the love I nearly lost forever. I replay the scenes in my head: the day I left home, my parents' tear-stained faces, the empty phone calls, the lies, and the loneliness abroad. I have apologized countless times, begged for forgiveness more times than I can count, and yet some memories never fade. The regret is alive, a constant companion that refuses to leave. I often whisper to myself, I destroyed everything with my own hands. I was careless, selfish, and naive. And though my husband and parents have forgiven me outwardly, and though life has granted me love and family again, the internal scars remain. Sometimes I imagine meeting that man again somewhere on a street, at a cafe, or any random corner. The thought terrifies me because I know the old fear, the old vulnerability, still lives inside me. Even after 8 years, I cannot forget. Even after countless apologies, I still carry the weight. My life is beautiful now, but the past is never gone. It shapes me, warns me, and reminds me daily of the consequences of choices made in haste, of trust betrayed, and love taken for granted. I live cautiously, gratefully, and with deep humility. Every hug, every smile, every laughter of my child is a reminder that while I cannot change the past, I can protect the present. I tell my story not just to confess, but to remind anyone watching: one moment of thoughtlessness, one choice made in blindness, can change lives forever. Regret doesn't wait. It doesn't forgive easily. And love, though resilient, is fragile, treasured only when protected, not taken for granted. I want to speak to you directly now, because this story is not just mine, it could be anyone's. Have you ever made a choice you knew would hurt someone you loved? Have you ever taken trust for granted, thinking it would always be there? I want you to pause for a moment and imagine the faces of the people you love the most, the ones who would wait for your call, who would stay awake worrying about you, who would forgive you even when you didn't deserve it. That was my reality. I left, I lied, I was selfish. And though I returned, rebuilt my life, and received forgiveness, the weight of my choices never left me. 8 years later, every memory is still vivid: the fear, the manipulation, the loneliness, the tears of my mother, my father, my siblings. No apology can erase it. No time can fully heal it. I carry the regret with me every single day, a silent reminder of the cost of my mistakes. But here's the lesson I want you to take away. Love is patient, love is forgiving, but it is also fragile. It is never guaranteed, and trust, once broken, takes years to rebuild. You may have second chances, like I did, but you cannot undo what you've done. All you can do is face it honestly, take responsibility, and commit to nurturing the relationships you almost lost. To anyone watching this story, if you still have parents, siblings, a spouse, or loved ones waiting for your presence, don't take it lightly. Don't let pride, fear, or temptation pull you away from the people who matter most. Every call you make, every word you speak, every act of love you show, these are the threads that keep your family together. I learned the hardest way possible, and I hope you don't have to. Even now, with a loving husband, a child who smiles at me every morning, and parents who have welcomed me back, I live with a lesson burned into my heart. Life can be beautiful again, but the past never forgets. I hope my story makes you pause, reflect, and hold those you love a little closer today. Because trust, once broken, leaves a shadow that never fully fades, and the people you hurt may carry it with them long after you think it's gone. So, before you scroll away, ask yourself, have you truly cherished the love and trust in your life today? Don't wait for regret to teach you the lesson that love already has.